nose works. Josh?
Checking.
Imagine that. The five of us all got this right from the first try, right? Well, welcome everyone. I'm Mark DeCourcy, the Senior Vice President here at the Chamber Foundation. And we appreciate you sticking around on day 2 for this important conversation about international crisis and disasters and the coordination that really needs to take place in these humanitarian efforts. I think that you probably have seen a few of our people on stage. To my left here is Joe Ruiz. He's the Vice President of Social Impact at the UPS Foundation. Next to him, Stephanie Stiege from Airlink. She is the Director of Humanitarian Programs there. Next to her is Kathy Juncker, who for the Bureau for Humanitarian Affairs, or BHA, at USAID, she leads the private sector engagement efforts. And then Josh Dozer is at the end of our row here, and he is with SOS International, and he runs their humanitarian affairs programs as well. So we've got a great lineup, a lot of different perspectives from the private sector, from nonprofits, from government. And we're going to keep this, well, pretty much on time, right, for 45 minutes. If we're saying something that you just don't get, and you really have a question that's important, and also I want to say it's a question, not a statement, please ask us, right? We'll take it from the stage here. So I just wanted to start by kind of level setting what everyone is doing in this space, because we have no shortage of humanitarian crisis around the world. I've been doing this for almost 18 years, both here and at the American Red Cross, and I've got to tell you, I've never seen it quite like this. And some of these are really non-traditional events that none of us have seen in our lifetime. And how we deal with those, because they're so sensitive and people still need the help. We'll get into that too. In my opening remarks at the conference yesterday, I stated, look, there is no playbook for some of this. There's no script. We've not been here before. And we don't have all the answers. But when we do have some answers, we're happy to share. And maybe you've got some answers that we don't. And we'd like to hear that too. So we'll start with you, Joe, just to kind of level set what the UPS and UPS Foundation are doing in this space and how you do it. And let's keep it to a couple minutes so we can get through everyone, and then we'll get into some more questions.
Sure. Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it. So the UPS Foundation is providing health and humanitarian relief support because, listen, UPS is a global company. We're the leading logistics company in the world with operations in over 200 countries in the world. So for us, for our people, for our customers, every disaster is local. So that's why this is such an important program for us, and a really important mission to really make sure that all communities are protected, become more resilient, and we respond, because in every case, it's impacting a key stakeholder of our organization. And it's what we've learned is that through our work, last year, for instance, we responded to more than 45 disasters and global crises, did over 2,000 shipments, that what we did in disaster relief had a real application for healthcare logistics. And as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, with the pandemic, what we saw is that we could bring our expertise and our logistics and our healthcare acumen to really train and help build more resilient healthcare systems across developing countries, and we're continuing to do that. So in addition to just meeting the immediate need, I think what we're really proud of is that we're helping to strengthen those health systems around the world.
Thank you, Joe. Stephanie?
I'm sorry I have to follow Joe because that was really impressive. Airlink is a global humanitarian organization that delivers critical aid to communities in crisis around the world. We work in emergencies, so whether it is a natural disaster like a hurricane or a wildfire, or it's a conflict like the one that's going on in Israel and Gaza right now, or it's a disease outbreak like the COVID-19 pandemic, or the cholera outbreak in Haiti, we are there, and we're working with nonprofit partners to get their aid supplies there and get their responders there. And we do that by working with the commercial aviation industry. So we love being part of the chamber because we understand that private sector is what makes a difference here. So we secure those free flights from the aviation industry, and we'll marry that with in-house logistics expertise that we have, as well as from our partners, our logistics partners, freight forwarders, UPS Foundation, and others. And ultimately, we're putting together sort of end-to-end logistics and transportation solutions to be able to get aid where it needs to go around the world. And then aside from the sort of basic transportation, we're helping our partners connect with other nonprofits. We work with about 200 nonprofits around the world, and helping them, maybe get in-kind products from other nonprofits, or marry up their programs with programs that are already on the ground, so they're reducing duplication of effort. And also smaller, still important things like making sure that NGOs have the right paperwork to clear customs, or they understand they need to pay duties on the other end, and therefore they need to budget for that or get funding for that. Advising them on changing import regulations around emergencies. I think it's worth noting that we get a lot of donated freight and a lot of donated tickets from airlines around the world, but nothing happens without our business partners, our philanthropic partners, because there are things that are part of the supply chain that aren't free, and that cost NGOs a lot of money. And so we're here to break down those logistical and cost-related barriers to entry for NGOs. So whether we're purchasing a flight because there's no flights into that country right now, we saw that in Haiti, we're seeing that in Sudan, we're seeing that in Gaza, or we're working with logistics partners to get that aid to the airport. It's not aid if it doesn't get there, so that's really what we're there for.
Thank you, Stephanie, and I love that. It's not aid if it doesn't get there, right? So true. And Kathy from BHA, many of you who have been around a while might remember OFTA, pretty much the same. Kathy's boss, Sarah Charles, is actually going to be speaking at the end of the lunch. That is a late edition, so don't go anywhere. Stick around this afternoon so you can hear Sarah, too, as she leads BHA. But Kathy, private sector engagement, explain what that means and how BHA works with companies.
Great. Well, thank you for that, Mark. And just so everyone knows, it's like BHA, our focus is to provide life-saving humanitarian assistance around the world to those most in need. And USAID is the lead federal coordinator when in humanitarian responses. And so when there's an event that we see so frequently, whether it's the Libya floods or the recent events or Turkey earthquakes earlier this year, we will set up both a DC-based response management team that really focuses on coordination on the DC side, working with the interagency partners, working with private sector partners and donors. We also set up a disaster assistance response team that really focuses on the work we do in the field, and really kind of works with the United Nations and as well as American Chambers of Commerce on the ground. And lots of times we also see that happening through the Foreign Commercial Services and other parts of the U.S. Embassy. And we have found, we view the private sector as a partner with us in our work, recognizing that, we see organizations like UPS really bringing in a lot of skill in terms of, as well as what Airlink does in terms of being able to move equipment or humanitarian supplies in the midst of a disaster response. USAID, we generally are funding nonprofits to implement a lot of our programs in the midst of humanitarian disasters, but we also recognize that there's a lot of partnerships needed kind of across the board, both from NGOs, the private sector, as well as the UN, as well as government.
And Josh, I'm going to stick with you after you introduce yourself and what your organization is doing. We're going to talk about challenges, so don't go anywhere, right?
I'm Josh Dozer. I'm the General Manager for Medical and Security Assistance Services for International SOS. We're an international company with operation centers in 26 countries. We have over 1,000 locations. Our job is to help our clients and their employees with anything that they need. It could be a medical matter, it could be a pre-trip advisory, security matter, it could be an operational logistics matter. We have to be very creative to be responsible for any hazard and any dynamic situation that could occur. Right now, we're focused on Israel and the Palestine evacuations and support. Very complex evacuations. We evacuated over 100 folks through charter flights, individual movement transportation, ground transportation, secure transportation, and sometimes just advice and guidance, whether it be security or medical, to help folks out of harm's way. In the Americas, Hurricane Otis with Mexico was talked about earlier. Very difficult situation. We're really forced to be very creative and need to be very responsive, because you're not always going to get that hurricane advisory 72 hours in advance. As Hurricane Otis demonstrated, it was 4 hours in advance. There were no special advisors from the hurricane centers. It went from a tropical storm to a Cat 5 within hours. Very difficult logistics, very difficult means of ingress and egress. And you need our clients, and many of you are our clients of ours, need those solutions. And we're there to support you. We'll deploy incident management teams to the field. We'll establish a crisis management team. Oftentimes, emergency supplies and logistics are there to support. The key things that I'm worried about, we're focusing on right now, obviously the Israel, Palestinian, Lebanon situations is going to be continuing, as you know. And as ports of entry and evacuation start to opening up from Gaza to Egypt, and was which just opened today, and Lebanon has been open. Folks are being identified for humanitarian assistance or movement. We need to be nimble to be able to support those. But within the Americas, Haiti. Haiti is always a developing situation. We have a lot of interventional assistance from other countries, including the countries from Africa, and that's a very dynamic situation. In Southeast Asia, Taiwan is always on our radar, but that's becoming business as usual. But we have to be on the lookout for hindrances to transportation in the South China Sea, in the Philippines. So we really have to be nimble and creative in what those solutions might be and anticipate anything that might come our way.
Yeah, so Josh, let's stick with these challenges for a minute, right? And you've identified the locations. Prior to where you are now, you were at FEMA. What did you learn here domestically that is applicable overseas in terms of responding to some of these events?
There's a lot of complicated factors, and a lot of it is between the public and private interface. The permitting permissions changes. Permissions, movement restrictions are always adjusting. You have to work across the seams and the public-private mechanisms to be able to make those operations work. And they adjust on an hourly basis. That's a key challenge there. Obviously, communications, transportation hindrances, these normal logistics are always on the forefront of our mind, but the changing dynamic of what's permissible, what we can permit, the changing of the regulations and the restrictions, adjustments to government results in changing of access to get restrictions, and that impacts everything from not just evacuations, but medical permissions, what type of medications you could bring into a company, who you could bring out, what type of drivers and vehicles are you allowed to move through ports of entry. This changes. I'll give you an example. Some evacuations from West Bank to Israel, we needed a different driver and a different vehicle for each different legs of the movement. In different paperwork at each step of the way. So that public-private intervention in adjusting restrictions and regulations is probably one of our biggest challenges that we have to work with and adapt to every incident.
Yeah, and clearly the name of the conference is Business Solves, but Kathy, in some of those instances that Josh mentioned, government can solve too. And can you talk a little bit about that and how AID and the rest of the U.S. government, State Department, the embassies, kind of can be of assistance in those situations?
Well, I think there's also, I think they're, looking at some of the coordination challenges. Right now, I think a lot of times we see different groups working in silos. That's part of the reason the humanitarian coordination structure was established. Yet, we don't necessarily have the mechanisms in place right now to really pull in the private sector into the overall humanitarian architecture. We have some great examples where it works. But I know, for example, in the Turkey earthquake response, there was definitely, that's one of the big lessons learned that we have, that, many actors worked outside of humanitarian architecture, which is fine. You're working with local governments, but then the question is, how can you bridge that gap? How can you pull that together? And I think that's really a key coordination challenge. And I don't know if we've necessarily cracked that nut. I think we see a lot of structures and conversations around, well, how can we make it happen? And I think part of it is we actually have to change some of the coordination structures. How do we get private sector actors with a seat at the table to actually be part of the conversations in the UN cluster systems and really engaging in that way? I think it's important to also communicate what's needed, what's not needed. I think in every crisis, the question is what's needed on the ground, and that can change. And I think we all in this room, if you've been working in this, you have numerous examples of the wrong items arriving and really creating problems in the long term. And the question is, how can we really make sure that those demand signals are able to leverage what's available, as well as getting the items to the needed populations, because that's as much of a critical component as anything. And I know I have colleagues on the panel who can speak to that much more eloquently than I can.
Well, then let's take advantage of them, right? So, Stephanie, these needs lists, they can change in midair. And like, how does Airlink track all of this in terms of what's needed where, when? And then when you actually get there, to Kathy and Josh's point, how do you kind of navigate what could change in terms of ports of entry, the allowances to offload? Like, how does all that, how do you help the airline industry do all these things?
It's difficult, I think, is the short answer. I mean, especially because we're seeing a nationalization of a lot of emergency responses. So we're seeing, Hurricane Otis, for instance, the Mexican government, perhaps rightly, wants to control the response, and the Turkey-Syria earthquakes. The Turkish government wanted to make sure that they were in the lead on the response, but that can mean that, the information flow around the needs, it's slow, it's fractious, it's very difficult to navigate. So we're working with our nonprofit partners. I think in the Turkey-Syria earthquake, we worked with about 50 nonprofits. When we launched our coordination call in a couple of days after the earthquake, we had 100 nonprofits show up just to understand what was needed, where everyone was working, how to get to Antalya and the places that were really hit hard. But we also had a lot of private sector actors turn up to that call. And I think the important thing for private sector actors to understand is in those early days is that listening is really important, and you can't listen with your mouth open. And having, for instance, some of our airline partners turn up to that call, they reached out to us afterwards and said, that was really helpful. We're going to tell our employees, don't do a donation drive. And it's something that we fight every time there's an emergency where people really want to help. And the best way that they can help is by working through those structures, that humanitarian architecture that Kathy was talking about.
And Joe, other than the don't do the donation drive piece, right? We're all in agreement on that.
Yes.
But even using the Turkey-Syria earthquake as an example, as we tried to inform companies what was needed, we had conflicting signals from the Turkish government, from AFAD, from the companies on the ground who actually had employees and facilities and commercial interest in Turkey. How does UPS navigate all of that?
Well, relationships determine results. So you have to build partnerships in advance of these disasters. You have to know who can get supplies into certain situations. Natural disasters are one thing. You're dealing with different countries. We've seen recently where Morocco didn't allow help from outside the country. But when you're dealing with conflict, then you really have to rely on the UN, because you can only take goods so far in a combat zone. So we often rely on our in-country intel. We rely on our people in-country. We always start local to see how we can support in-country first. What we saw with Ukraine was this outpouring of support that was coming from the US, but what we wanted to make sure is that we're most efficient. And so we were prioritizing goods from Europe that we could be driving, so you can deliver 5 times more goods across Europe into Poland, get them to the border. Because flying out of Louisville is a very expensive proposition, $500,000 per flight. So we're trying to educate people on how the best way to source those supplies closest to the disaster when possible. But every disaster is different, Mark, and depending on the cooperation from the government, and nobody should ever send anything unless there's a need for it. And one site you can refer to is the Global Logistics Cluster. They are responsible for mobilizing the humanitarian community, and they have a website, and it usually will give you a situation report, will provide information. We have a logistics emergency team. For instance, in Ukraine, one of the challenges was language. The Ukrainian government was sending guidance every day on what could get across the border. It was all in Ukraine. We actually had UPSers who translated that into English and put it on the cluster site every day so humanitarians knew what they needed to do in terms of paperwork to get their supplies into Europe and then across the border into Ukraine.
And Stephanie, Airlink got its start after the Haiti earthquake, right? When you have lack of government in that situation, how did you manage that?
Well, I wasn't there 14 years ago. I've only been with Airlink for 10 years. But I think we did see, at that time there was a lot less coordination in the humanitarian community. But you saw a lot of NGOs and sort of philanthropic actors come together to put sort of a pipeline of aid and responders all coordinated all together. So I think we sent about 20 flights in from Miami, and we were working with universities and hospital systems and things like that to make sure really what was needed was medical aid because there were so many people hurt. And so really focusing on just getting that pipeline of medical supplies in. But I think it was just a lot of talking. And that's really what is needed in that immediate aftermath. Get that information and make sure it's disseminated.
And Kathy, I remember from my time at the Red Cross after the Haiti earthquake, how critical the State Department and USAID were to help us all figure out, much to Stephanie's point, what's needed where and when. How do the people in this room connect with USAID the best way? Like, how should they reach out to you?
So as I mentioned at the top, after every disaster, that requires an international response. So the Hurricane Otis in Mexico, that's an international response wasn't stood up, but we set up a disaster response team. And it's through those response teams that they have information on what's most needed on the ground. But as well, I think it's also important to say, I wouldn't necessarily just automatically, we can definitely provide information, but the United Nations has cluster systems, right? So if you have a particular area of expertise, whether it's logistics through the World Food Program or health through WHO, it's through those cluster groups that you're really going to find that information of what's most needed, because those clusters are having those conversations about what's needed on the ground and where to go. After the Haiti earthquake, very specifically, there's local focus has really been mentioned a few times, and we really like supporting local businesses, recognizing that they have such an important role to play in helping communities recover from a disaster, especially when you're looking at small and medium enterprises. And we, through a local business network in Haiti, they were actually telling us what the local businesses could actually supply. So you're not flooding markets with items that could actually impact the market and actually lead to a longer recovery time. And so it really is important to figure out, where in those structures you can plug in on Relief Web. All the information about needs is published and out there. But if you're looking for someone who can help point you in the right direction, we can definitely kind of help point in those areas. And a lot of it is that partnership, partnering with NGOs, having those relationships ahead of time. And it's through those partnerships that I think I've seen some of the most successful examples of being businesses really being able to have a true impact, whether it's through in-kind donations or cash donations. Again, it depends on the response. Which, for example, certain responses, cash just makes sense just given all the struggles.
So Josh, Kathy kind of hit on something that we haven't quite talked a lot about, and that is beforehand, right? We've talked a lot about what happens to the right side of the event, but what about to the left side event before it happens? Like, how do you all manage that? Because we can't predict where these things are going to happen. How do you get ready? How do you get your partners ready? How do you forecast risk?
Yeah, and how do we get our clients ready? It's funny, you mentioned the Haiti earthquake from 2012 a couple times. I got some shivers because I was a literally documentation specialist for FEMA at the time in response to that. It was an amazing experience. But we have a lot of clients who continue to go to Haiti for humanitarian aid, research, assistance, you name it. A lot of universities are down there providing support, providing humanitarian assistance. You know, constant intelligence and scanning of the framework and of the political dynamics and what the security situation is down there. That's a 24/7 job. So we have to constantly provide our clients and humanitarian groups going down there with that analysis and pre-thought and risk awareness before they arrive. They also have to be prepared on what to expect. Is this travel appropriate or not? Are these people equipped or not? Do they have are they medically prepared? Are they security-wise prepared? Are they going? Which locations are they? Which neighborhoods will they be in? And is it safe to operate in those neighborhoods? And do they need to adjust their operations based upon that neighborhood-specific intelligence on the ground? So that's really our primary focus for our clients as they engage left of response, to your point, in being there. The other thing is maintaining a provider network. You know, we maintain about 100,000 providers across the globe, but Haiti's a difficult location to maintain that provider network. We have to scrutinize the sufficiency of the medical network and the security network. We use the Dominican Republic a lot, and providers from the Dominican Republic, and make sure that they have maintained the continued access to Haiti and permitting rights to be able to fly in, whether it be helicopter or fixed wing, to be able to provide support to our clients when they're in Haiti. So that investment in the network and maintaining their access and assuring their access in case something does happen is really prevalent. But making sure your staff are aware, up to speed, and you've checked that. You've applied your risk management analysis on whether this is needed, whether it's appropriate, and are they in the right spot and are they prepared when they're there. That's how we're providing the support left of response here.
So Joe, let's stick with that for a second about forecasting risk. It's not just looking at the places where things may happen, but it's also looking internally to make sure that you've got the capabilities to respond the way you want to when something does happen. How does UPS view that? And it's not just through the foundation, because you've got so many assets, so many resources through the corporate side, that how does it all come together?
Well, it's a great collaboration. We couldn't do what we do without our global operations, which, you know, because we're delivering 24/7 around the world, we have meteorologists. We learn how to plan around weather systems. We are great at adapting, building plans and new plans. We started in February planning for our Christmas season, which is coming up, so please ship UPS this Christmas season. All right, we can use the help. But it's a coordinated effort of the combination of engaging and training our employees. We partner with all the members on this panel. With Josh, our logistics emergency team members all have access to ISOS, so if they're in country, we've used ISOS to train them on health, safety, and security before they get into country. And when we're there, health and safety is their first and foremost priority. We deployed people into Turkey this past year. We actually deployed people to the border of Ukraine, and we helped the UN cluster build a supply chain into Ukraine, because that's not where they operate. They operate in places like Yemen. They don't have a presence in Europe, and so we allow them to use our facilities, access our offices, and help coordinate intelligence with our operations in countries. So that's a little bit about how we do that planning.
And Stephanie, I would imagine the airlines that you work with, pretty much the same, right?
I mean, yeah, we're working with them year-round to just make sure that we're ready for emergencies. They're ready for emergencies. I think everyone knows about Atlantic hurricane season, but we're also looking at other things around the world now. You know, South Pacific cyclone season is right around the corner. And so we're working to build a network of Asia Pacific airlines that they know how this works. Something's going to hit, somebody just did hit Vanuatu. And so we're pulling on those airlines to help mobilize aid, get it there quickly. But it really takes building those networks proactively all around the world. It's easy to say, we do that between disasters, and there's not a whole lot of between these days. But you sort of have to do it concurrently with everything else you're doing. And if you're just starting to have that conversation when something has already happened, it's going to be too late.
Kathy, I mean, how does the U.S. government look at this and try to figure out how they can sufficiently deploy resources? Because you're stretched pretty thin too as a U.S. government, right? And make those prioritizations and make those choices on how you're going to respond. Like, what are the inner workings of AID on something like that?
So, when there's an international event, there is a disaster decision made, right, as to whether or not we're going to stand up a disaster response team. And Mark, it's very true. We have been stretched thin, but, the reality, especially over the past few months, we've set up numerous, we set up in the course of 2 weeks in September, 3 different disaster response teams. And it's a matter of recognizing priorities, because for our bureau, responding to humanitarian disasters is what we are to do. And so it's recognizing, where do you pull resources from different teams? And so I think that's part of the challenge. But you have to look at that. I think a lot of it, though, goes to some of that preparation, right? Your disaster risk reduction. I think one of the things we definitely saw in Ukraine and Turkey is you have companies that have many affiliates overseas, and it's like, well, what are your business continuity plans in place to take care of your employees in country, as well as, for your supply chains, and just thinking about that in advance, especially for local businesses. And we really are trying to think about, well, how can we better prepare entities in advance of a disaster to, A, be better equipped to respond, but as well as to ideally potentially decrease the impact.
So PHA responds to some 70-plus events in 70-plus countries a year on average. Can you talk about a few of them that have gone really well that you try to model the others after? Is that a thing where you can actually say, look, we got that one really great in terms of the response, in terms of staying there and participating in the recovery? Because there's been some events where we've been involved where it's not gone very well, right? And for a lot of different reasons, and part of it is because there was no muscle memory, right? Or no relationships, to Joe's earlier point, were built ahead of time. But instead of focusing on what went wrong, talked about what went really right.
And I'd like to kind of really focus on the lens of how we work with businesses, right? Really kind of keeping on that focus. And again, many disasters actually don't necessarily make it to an international response. They're responded to very locally, whether it's in the Philippines, Sri Lanka, or even now in Mexico. And I think it goes back to those relationships. It's having those structures in place. It's having the, businesses with a seat on the table at the humanitarian architecture. So it's actually being able to have everyone talk to each other and have that coordination in advance, and folks know what they're doing. And this means that you see businesses as really linked up with the local National Disaster Management Organization, or the FEMA of the country that you're in, or the FEMA equivalent, and really being part of disaster scenario exercises, being part of developing some of the emergency management response plans, and actually having businesses as part of that conversation in advance of things going on, as well as just recognizing what that role is well in advance of a disaster. But I think we're seeing more and more that disasters are local, and ensuring that communities are able to respond is important, because I think more disasters than not don't break the bubble of the large international response.
And Josh, on that note, how are your clients being integrated into that local response, whether they be with those national FEMAs, if you will, and how are you advising them to get more involved, to Kathy's point, in terms of scenario planning at the place where they're at, and again, to the left of the event?
It's a matter of priority. It's always a key emphasis to have your resilience plans, your business continuity plans for your operations in country, and having them have the social awareness of who to call, what to do, how to reach us, how to reach others. That's a key emphasis that we provide to all of our clients, and we have to be available to folks before they travel. And so we encourage folks to call early, call often, call before you go, ask for advice, ask about your unique health concerns, your unique security concerns, and make sure you're full awareness of that and make sure that's socialized. Regarding the public-private engagement, we often have to play sometimes some interference of that. Sometimes the local public agencies don't necessarily have a tactical perspective on things. They have a strategic view, even of the incident. They have a strategic view of the incident and incorporating the private sector as far as what their engagement would be, what their priorities are, from a strategic sense on operating, but not necessarily from a tactical sense of which gate to go through, and which one's open, and what are the hours of operation, and can this car get permission to enter through a particular gate of entry. So that's where we have to provide some interference and provide that support. And I think from a lesson learned from a public-private engagement perspective, that's where I think some of the gains can be made. Fostering a tactical engagement with the local public and agencies, even with the U.S. federal agencies. Having that tactical view in the incident, not just the strategic.
When an event occurs here at the Chamber, one of our first calls are to what we would say in an international sense, the American Chamber of Commerce in that country. For most countries, we have one. If it's a domestic event, there's a state or local chamber. You saw the governor of Hawaii. Our first call was to Sherry, who's the CEO of the Hawaii Chamber, because she knew the governor, right? I mean, we got amazing information like that. And then when companies came calling on us to say, how can we best help in the Hawaii wildfires in this instance, we had really good data and good intel to share with them. So to that point, so all of what our panelists have said, if you have that in-country connectivity, use it immediately, right? And a lot of times, they're victims too, right? But we saw that in a number of disasters where they can't respond to you because they're still responding. We get it, right? And what you do is you start drawing that concentric circle of who is outside the disaster zone, right? Who can provide this with the best information? We saw that with Turkey, especially, right, Joe?
Yeah.
And fortunately, companies like UPS have a huge presence in Turkey, and you've got that information, right?
Yeah, and with the partnership with the Chamber for the last 10 years, we've built resilience program. Solemn Covey is all about strengthening the resilience of small businesses, and that eventually became what's known as Resilience in a Box, and it's a toolkit in multiple languages that small businesses can access on the U.S. Chamber Foundation website. But because of that relationship we had in Turkey for the last decade, we were able to get intelligence to mobilize and to actually help small businesses get back on their feet more quickly, be able to provide support to the community more quickly, and also become part of the response effort in the country, either whether it's donating or transporting supplies. And what's really makes me proud is that the entity that we have worked on for over a decade is now leading the recovery centers in the area of the impact area of the earthquakes in that part of Turkey. So building resilience both with your employees, with our customers, our small businesses is really important. And it's something that people don't want to spend much money on, but it's so important. You can't just always be chasing. You have to continue to talk about the message. You have to continue to reinforce to our people. I think over the last few years with the pandemic, people have started to feel and pay more attention to how they can personally be more resilient with the impacts of mental health. All of that is really part of the holistic resilience, and I think it really continues to be important. In addition, Mark, I have to say I have to give my plug for long-term recovery, because most of the money is always spent in the first 30 days. But organizations, what you can do is you can donate something immediately if you want to, but you can also reserve a piece of that for the future. You don't have to make an immediate decision on all of your contribution, so you can actually park some of that for specific needs that are identified 6 months and 12 months into the future.
Well, look, I mean, we're all humanitarians here, and one of the things that we, our muscle is to provide help when it's needed as fast as it can, right? And to your point,
Right.
sometimes help is needed further down the road. And one of the things, you may not be surprised to hear this from the chamber, but a former FEMA administrator said this, and I think he got it so right, that a community's never truly recovered until there's a resumption of commerce. Right? If you think about that, it's not UPS, are their trucks rolling? It's those small and medium-sized enterprises. Are they open and are they doing business? Because if they are, chances are that community is or on the way to recovery, even though it may take a little bit longer. We've only got a few minutes left, so we're going to start down the end of the panel. And Josh, closing thoughts, parting words, best advice, it's all yours.
Well, I was just remarking of individual preparedness and readiness, and when your folks are downrange providing humanitarian assistance, what are they prepared as an individual, as a person? It's not just the delivery of humanitarian assistance, the resilience of your team delivering the humanitarian assistance. Are they prepared based upon their personal circumstances, their personal medical circumstances, of where they're going to be? And oftentimes, when there's a disaster, you'd be surprised that most of our requests for assistance are coming from folks who are on leisure travel while deployed. What is your policy on assisting them when they're on leisure travel with their family members, where they go off-site, where it wasn't really originally planned? And do they know what they're covered for and what support that they will have? And what is the full wraparound services that will be available to them? So, are your folks delivering the humanitarian assistance? Are they ready? And are they well versed on what they're eligible for support with? What if aid is available to them? Who to call in all circumstances? Because if your folks who are delivering humanitarian assistance are in harm's way and they're vulnerable, then your operations to deliver the humanitarian assistance is also vulnerable. So I just want to, and that includes mental health. They're going to see some tough things and terrible things, and they're going to be in very stressful situations. Do they have the support to be resilient themselves? And I guess that's my parting word. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Mark, for pulling together this panel. I think for me, it really goes back to that disaster risk reduction, that disaster resilience, again, with the local focus of whether it's your local affiliates, whether it's local markets and small and medium enterprises. I think that's really going back to what you said, Mark, is like we really look at, if a small or medium business can get back in business, then you have employees who are getting their salaries, you have more supplies in the community are just really important. And just really thinking of kind of the arc of kind of a response, and also recognizing that there's the immediate disaster, but then there's also everything that goes in advance, the relationships, the working especially with the local government, and getting engaged and involved with the UN architecture. So if that's really an area where you want to be involved in, there's a lot of places you can go, NGOs you can build relationships with, groups that are actually connect businesses with NGOs that you can really be doing in advance. So when an event happens, you'll definitely be ready to respond.
I think the beautiful thing about Airlink and about the U.S. Chamber in general is that everyone in this room understands that the private sector can play a huge role in imparting knowledge to the humanitarian sector on how to do things better. And I think that everyone in this room understands that you can do good by doing what you do every single day. So we see that with airlines. We see that with logistics companies like UPS. And I guess I would invite everyone in the room to think about how they can be doing that in terms of the humanitarian architecture, contributing sort of your core competency in order to make humanitarian aid better. We're in a time of everybody's stretched very thin. There are more humanitarian crises than ever. There's less funding than ever, so we are going to have to work smarter in order to make a difference and to reach the vast number of people that need assistance around the world. So with that, thank you.
Joe, before you go, right? And before you go, so for those of you who were here for the reception last night, and for those of you who weren't, Joe's going. He's retiring, and this may be his last microphone, certainly in our building. So we want to make sure, Joe, that everyone understands your contributions, again, because it's been so important, and literally, you are saving lives. And what UPS has done over the years with your leadership in the disaster response space. So, thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you. I love my job. I have the best job in the world. What I would say, and playing off of what Stephanie said, I always talk about our superpower. UPS is logistics, and we want to go all in and help build the capacity of these organizations. And all of your organizations do something that's really unique, whether it's technology or whatever. So how you can build the capacity. We work with the best partners. We have CARE in the room. We have the Red Cross in the room. They are phenomenal organizations, but they can all get better. If we can help them become more effective to improve their response, to increase the number of people, because the number of people who need help is not getting smaller, it's getting bigger. And so what we can do to build their capacity is so important. And just the last thing I'll say is about partnerships, and I'm going to mention something about Airlink. I got a call from a public affairs partner of ours at UPS in the West Coast who said some LA rescue guys wanted to go help in Turkey. They didn't know how. They didn't know how they were going to get there. So my partner calls me up, and I said, you know what? I'm going to call Airlink. I said, I don't know if it'll work, but within 3 days, 7 search and rescue members from the LA Police Department were in Turkey, and 3 days after they got there, they pulled 3 people from under the rubble. So thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Airlink. And that's the power of partnerships. Building those relationships beforehand means the world of difference. Okay.
Thank you all. Let's give a hand for the panel, right? They are saving lives. Okay, this is the end of this session. So I just want to give everyone the instructions on what's next. In the room with the fancy coffees are your box lunches. Grab one. Meet us back in the big hall, the great hall, because we do want to hear from Sarah Charles at AID in a little bit after you finish your lunch. And we've got a couple other speakers. And we really appreciate all of your work here. I see a lot of nonprofits in the room too, as well as companies, and everything that you do to make the world a better place and safer for everybody. So thanks.